What is up? This is Cam Gillette, and we have Disco Volante here at the Independent Musician Podcast. Welcome back, man. It's so good to talk to you.
Glad to be back.
Big shout out. We actually started streaming the show on One Up Radio. So if you're seeing us from YouTube, hey, what's up? It's so good to be working with those guys. So today we're going to be talking about mastering. And so the reason I want to talk about that, I think there's a lot of, I wouldn't say I would say incomplete information about mastering audio, both as an artist and as an engineer. So that's mainly basically what we're going to focus on today.
All right. So the first question that a lot of people might have or might want some clarification on is, when you say mastering, what exactly do you mean? What is mastering? Okay,
so this definition has changed a little bit over time. But so disco, we both master our own music, and what Indeed. I mean by that, it's a little bit different than engineering or mixing music. So an engineer or a mixer, they'll actually record the stuff down to Pro Tools or to vinyl or to tape or to some physical medium or to a computer, and then they'll arrange it and EQ it and process it to make it all fit together in a blocks, and so the relationships between these different sounds are pretty cohesive. And then after that, they ship it to a mastering engineer, typically another person, but not always. What the mastering engineer will typically apply some processing to make that as loud as it can be without it actually sounding like it starts getting squished. Because you can compress audio, meaning that you chop up just the highest peaks and then raise the entire signal up, meaning that the entire mix sounds louder. And if you can do it right, it makes it a lot more louder than it would be otherwise. And the reasons you want to do that is just the human ear likes music to be as loud as it can be and by its actual sonic volume. And alternatively, if you don't do that, you're going to be competing against all these other songs that are doing that. For instance, if you listen to the Black Album by the Metallica, as opposed to their most recent release, Death Magnetic, I think Death Magnetic will sound disgustingly louder because it's mastered much to be much louder.
And a lot of that did come about in what they called the loudness wars, which was in the days of radio, where signals that were stronger, that were louder, and therefore more powerful were going to be the ones that were broadcast most efficiently and received by the most number of people.
Yeah, and so if you heard a song on the radio and it happens to be just a little bit louder than the song before, the human ear is just going to gravitate to that. Granted, the longer you do that, it makes music rather taxing on your ears. So a mastering engineer's job is to find the optimum relationship between getting music to be as loud as it can be without sacrificing the music for it. Because if you start going too loud, it'll start actually crushing and music can't get quiet. So it has less ability.
Indeed, it has what people call less dynamic range, and that means that you make the loud parts a little bit softer, like Cam was saying, and you make the soft parts a little bit louder until the difference between loud and soft is much less, but the overall level is a lot higher. If you were, for instance, to listen to a lot of modern EDM songs, those are really, really limited hard, meaning the lows are pretty high, and therefore the highs really aren't that much higher than the lows, and it's just kind of really loud and pumping all the time, which in certain forms of music has sort of become standard practice. And I think when a lot of people hear the term mastering, they think about applying that sort of process to, their track.
Yeah, and it's a mastering engineer's job to understand when and where to do the right thing, basically. For instance, like classical music, if you listen to a car, you'll have parts where you can't hear anything and parts where you're like, oh God, you're basically turning that volume up and down. So for modern music, you're trying to avoid that. So when it's quiet, it's just quiet enough that you don't have to adjust the volume up. And when it's loud enough, you don't have to turn it down. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what mastering is.
Mm-hmm. And sort of, depending on whether or not you're prioritizing dynamic range versus overall level, becomes sort of a judgment call of, the medium that it's going to be distributed through and the sort of music it is and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure a lot of people who make their own music, we'll say, what's one good way to really improve the sound of your tracks? How can you take it to the next level? And almost unilaterally, people will say, if you have a good mix, if you've recorded everything nicely, if it's well balanced, and if everything is sounding good when you recorded it, maybe it's time to master it if you really want it to be, if you really want it to be radio ready, as a lot of people will say. However, this presents a number of challenges, because one of the first pieces of advice you'll hear after master your tracks is don't master your own tracks. And why do you think that is, Cam?
I mean, it's a really common thing if you read online. Don't master your music. Well, and I'm gonna tell you all the reasons why that's correct, and tell me all the reasons why you shouldn't do that. So the main reason is, uh, even if you're working in the best studio or a world class studio, that studio has a color and it sounds a certain way to your ears, and your ears have their own color. And you, after you listen to a song a couple of times, and you're going to listen to it hundreds probably when you're mixing it, you become very close to it and you just stop. It's not as fresh, and things don't jump out to you as much as they would on a fresh listen. And so in some ways, this could be fixed by just having another mix engineer look at it. But like having somebody who has a slightly different role than the mix engineer and has a fresh set of ears can be very valuable to say like, hey, I know you like this part here, but maybe you just need to take the whole, and they can give you advice on your mix. And that's part of what it does. And they're also in it typically almost always in a different room. So the room's going to have a different color, and it's going to basically lie to you in different ways. And again, having somebody who's there with a sole job of he does not want to change your mix. He just wants to create the optimum sound. And as a mix engineer, it's very easy or someone who's trying to do both, to switch between the roles far too often. If you're able to say like, no, I'm going to master this. I'm going to this is the mix. I'm not going to change it. This is what I have to deal with. When you can focus in on one role, I think you can do a far better job of that. And I think that's really difficult to do when you're doing both roles. And the reality is the mix engineer is probably going to have far better gear than you.
Indeed, and one of the main roles of mastering, in my opinion, is not only making it sound as good as it can, but making it sound as good as it can on the most number of systems possible. So very often in mastering studios, they'll have 5, 6, 7 different sets of speakers that they listen to something on, just to make sure that if you put it in mono, things don't get too crunchy, or all kinds of things that you, as the musician who's also recording your own track, might not necessarily think about, or perhaps even have the gear to figure out on your own, or the experience for that matter.
I mean, I think the main reason why I would recommend people not to do it is it's another role. As a musician, like, all right, you had to learn how to play an instrument or instruments. As a songwriter, you had to learn how to songwrite. As a mix engineer, you had to learn how to mix. As a producer, you had to learn how to produce. Those are all like full-time jobs of people. And to become a mastering engineer, it's another role. Like, it's not a mix engineer. It's a different mindset. You're going to have to learn a lot of things and experiment a lot and fail a whole lot. And that's just going to take a huge amount of time from all of those other roles. And I would say mastering imparts the least color out of all those. So I think you can have every single part of those roles and have someone else master it, and it still be very true to your original vision. As opposed to if you had someone else mix your music, they're going to be making a lot of decisions on their own that are going to heavily color your own music and affect the signature that you probably want. So in that sense, I think it's from a time investment, unless you really love mastering and it's fun to you, and you really want to spend the hundreds of hours and thousands of dollars on gear to get to that point, I recommend not doing it.
So, with that said, we arrive at our next point. With that said, both Cam and I do master our own music, and we're now going to, so I guess, first of all, for all the reasons that you just said why it's a bad idea to master your own music, why do you master your own music?
Okay, so assuming you're in that subset of people that wants to, or you're cheap, honestly, that's a big cheap, or you like the challenge, any of those categories, say we're going there. Mm-hmm. Those are the main reasons I do. I like to. Well, there's reasons why I think why I currently master my music and why I continue and why I think other people should. So I'll start with the reasons why I do. The main reason is money and time, because like I've spent enough time that I know how to do it. Like, and I can reasonably pick it up, and I'm going to prioritize it. And that means even if it takes me 100 hours to get this song right, it's still going to be faster probably than me sending it off to an engineer, because I'll just work all night for several nights. And so in that sense, I can have a faster turnaround time typically.
So not really being beholden to somebody else's schedule in terms of your own content distribution.
Yeah. And that being said, I do try to get my mixes checked as often as I can from other people and my masters. But I will say an overarching thing why you should try to learn how to master. And by this, I don't mean this is something, even if you choose to not eventually not master your own tracks, I think it's a good idea to try to learn how to some degree, because it really changes how you mix. Because knowing, basically, once you mix a track and try to master yourself, you're like, God, I really screwed myself here. This made this really difficult to master because of the way I mixed this. Like, I kind of just like, well, I'll deal with this later, realizing that if you can make decisions early on in the mixes and make certain decisions in color, it'll make the mastering engineer's job a lot easier. And not that I care that his job is easier, but it'll make it easier to make a
you know,
far
yeah,
more
it kind of comes down to
simple.
the principle of like rubbish in, rubbish out, right?
Yeah.
And by getting your mix as good as you possibly can, you know, mastering is really just polishing it and making it ready for whatever medium you intend to distribute it through. Mastering is not like a surrogate mix. It's not to fix the mistakes you made in mixing and decided you would address later. And by trying to master your own tracks, you kind of come face to face with that very quickly.
Because
There are
I would say
times
that
that
most
I've
people,
actually gone back and like had to remix a track just because I'm like running into things that I cannot fix in the master.
yeah, and most people think of mastering. If you ever try to do this stuff, you just throw a limiter on there and crank it till like it's too much, and then you dial it back a little bit. That's technically it's mastering, but like I'm gotten to the point where I make mixes where sometimes that actually is the correct master. I've gotten to the point where I process and I've done enough compression limiting on the bus, individual track, bus, and groups level that often the mastering is a pretty simple chain. And as opposed to, I've also written tracks where I basically was fixing things in the master, like where I just screwed myself to so much that I've had to apply so much to those mastering chains.
Well,
And
you know,
so,
like
but
a lot of professional mastering studios, like their main focus is very light EQing and some compression just to, you know, even off some levels and set it to the correct, you know, level for, you know, for radio or for Spotify or for whatever. And
yeah, and that's part of the job. But I'm
when
saying
you
like,
have a mix done in a professional studio, it arrives at the mastering studio
yes.
basically ready to be put out.
Yeah, and I guess that I say this so learning to master will help you become a better mixer.
Mm.
That's really what I'm trying to say. I say that's the one of the biggest benefits, at least trying. Again, even if you don't end up doing it, it's one of the biggest benefits. And so I would say that leads into like something that's gotten really popular now, and I think it's susceptible of our generation is websites like Lander, like LANDR, which
Lander,
will
yeah, yeah,
master your
yeah.
tracks for. So what they will do, they will throw some sort of dynamic preset on there. They're going to make its best guess,
It's
and
essentially like you take the electronic preset from Ozone and put it on your track.
yes. And
And
is that bad? Honestly, like I mean, depending on if you get lucky,
depends on your track, you know, it depends on
if
your
you get
track.
yeah, if you know what you're, I would say if I could do that, and I would say most of my mixes would probably sound fine and probably be pretty close to
Mhm.
commercial level. And most importantly, they would have the appropriate numbers. And by numbers, I'll get into that a little bit later. But there's certain numbers that Spotify or SoundCloud or any of these distributors expect your music to have. And more if you exceed these certain numbers, they're going to penalize you, and your track's going to sound like garbage on these platforms. And I
Mm.
would say if you don't want to spend all the time learning how to do that, because that information is a little bit harder to find online, I would
And
recommend doing
is not
Lander.
always consistent either.
Yeah, and especially if you're in electronic, like music, either from like a rapping SoundCloud kind of vibe or more of an underground like scene of electronic music, I'd say Lander's probably fine if you just don't want to worry about it. If you're more into like more popish stuff where you're
Hmm.
trying to compete, I would probably recommend long term going away from that direction.
And yeah, I mean, it really does depend on the kind of music. There are certain forms of music that really don't have the kind of dynamic range that makes a master more difficult or makes these decisions more important. And for
Mhm.
those things, if you really are just looking for a way to kind of flatten out the waveform and make the general level higher, I mean, it will certainly do that. And it will do it well if you feed it
Yeah,
an appropriate track.
like this is going into your world, but if you're designing music to be DJ'd, it's a different ball game. You're not competing because basically the DJ will just turn your track up. You know, as
Mhm.
long as you're close enough, it's fine. I mean,
And you know,
what a good
it's interesting you should say that though, because I always really so you and I might differ on this, but for
yeah.
me, my masters, I always look for the maximum dynamic range that I can, even if that means my overall level is a little bit softer. And
Yeah, I would push back on this. I've actually analyzed your music before. Well, I let Spotify do it for me, but
oh
you
yeah,
can actually go on Spotify and it'll tell you the dynamic range of any song on Spotify.
you can get it in like perceived loudness and lufts and all that, right?
Yes, well, it's a little bit farther than that, but that's the basic idea. And so it depending on how dynamic your music is, so if you had a track that was not very dynamic versus a track that was pretty damn dynamic, it'll actually turn down the super non-dynamic one to try to mix this. That's why you listen to
To
Spotify. Like most
make it
tracks
on
kind of
the
stay on the same
mhm.
the ballpark, even when the original track's not. So, but obviously it's not perceived loudness. It's not real loudness because everything basically
It's
it
like
keeps at the same
attenuated
thing.
loudness, right?
Yeah. And so, but it's more trying to get the what a human hears as loudness. So yeah, that's what I would recommend on trying to master your own or not master your own. There's not a one sit like everybody should do this or not. It's like it takes a lot of time, but I think it's a very helpful thing to understand how you mix, and it has really changed how I mix, and I make much better mixes because of that.
And it's certainly it's also something that's definitely evolved over time as well, because when you listen, even when, you know, as a DJ, when you play a track from like, you know, the 90s, some of the really like early house and techno that was first coming out, the actual level of the track is not as high as a modern techno track.
Sure.
One thing
part of that
really
was just a
notice,
lack of standardization.
Part of it was a lack of standardization, but also part of it was a kind of a difference in like mixing habits. And of course, the way that they were recording these things wasn't anywhere near as easy to make the levels, you know, as kind of clean cut and, you know, just perfectly square and granular as they've become. But because of that, I tend to find actually older tracks do have more dynamic range. It's like, yeah, you have to turn it up a little bit on the master, but, you know, if you want it to kind of be at the same level as a modern track. But when the bass drops in, it really drops in. And the reason for that is because of the contrast between the loud and the soft, which is all but disappeared in a lot of electronic music.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're mentioning the history of it. I'll just dive into that briefly. Originally, mastering was far more concerned about making it so it didn't mess up your vinyl. There's like if you had too much high frequencies, and like part of mastering for vinyl, it still is if you're doing that. Like there's high frequency limiters that you have to put in because vinyl can't handle it correctly, as well as like they had very little bass information because they didn't want to actually shake your cabinet, which would knock the stylus off, which would then you can listen to music.
And actually mastering for vinyl as well, like taking the cutting lathe into account. If you have too many transient peaks, it would, you know, make the lathe jump and you'd have to redo it and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, that's a different job. But mastering for CD or for digital, and as well as, and like it used to be, you mastered basically to make it as loud as it could be on the radio. And so the thing about radio production as well is radio already sends it through some like they're literally called broadcasting compressors. Like with the LA2A is literally a broad, is that LA2A? The Teletronics one, whatever that is. It's literally a broadcasting compressor. It's used by radio stations originally. And they're going to compress, you're already compressed. So like you got that master right where you want it, and then they're going to squish it some more. And so we got to this point where we were crushing music too, like a little bit too much. And then on top of that, it was leaving louder than it should be. So then the radio
it's kind of like when you like play one of your tracks in like iTunes or something with like their compressor on, and it just like, you know, it slams it.
Yeah.
With that in mind, with all the benefits of doing your own mastering in that it improves your mixing, makes you listen to your tracks differently, it kind of changes the way you put a track together. How did your first mastering go? Like, what did you how'd you start it? How did you get into it, and how did you approach it? Because I'm sure there's a lot of people who have, you know, who are working with Ableton or Pro Tools or something who would like to give it a try. And what's like the best jumping in point, do you think?
I'll start with how almost everybody starts, and then I'll tweak that. So this is the quick start guide to mastering. Is most people steal or download an illegal copy of Ozone, which is like basically a mastering suite, meaning it has a lot of the different plugins that you would often use, and while the workflow that you would have in mastering. And it's a great program. I have little problems with it. And throw in a preset of that. And if you click a preset, it'll be like, wow, this sounds a million times better already. It sounds better because it's louder. And louder is not better, but to the human ear, it's like, oh, that sounds better because it's louder. It's like, all right, so try to turn that Ozone on, and then try to match the same volume as it was before. And so then compare at the same perceived volume, those two different things. Okay, and then that's about where, if it sounds worse, then you probably are compressing things too much. So on the master limiter on that Ozone, turn down its threshold a little bit, or turn up its threshold so it doesn't compress as much. But there's one piece of that I did not find on almost any mastering tutorial, and it's one of the most important if you actually expect to upload anything to SoundCloud or Spotify or anything. This is really important, and people just don't talk about it. It's called intersample peaks. And this is also called true peak. And so basically, long story short, like a digital sound is a wave. So like all sound is waves. But the thing is, like when things inside the box and inside a digital realm, things can be perfect. But as soon as they get translated from a digital to an analog realm, certain things happen. And just by the nature of that scientific transformation, the very top of these things, these waves, if you have things mastered really hard, will get clipped off. And so although it looks like it peaks at 0, right where it should, the true peak, which is what the true peak is basically what happens when you convert this thing to an analog realm, which if you're listening to it, it's in an analog realm because it's in the real world. Mm-hmm. So what you need to do is account for that. So what you're going to want is a true peak detector of some sort. So meaning you're going to want to get a plugin that does that. So the free one is called Ulean Loudness Meter. So just Google that. It's Youlean.
Yeah, you actually that's the one you linked me to in one of our previous.
And so that will give you a couple of different readings. It's going to give you a bunch of information that you're, for now, we'll get to some of it, but for now, just ignore it. Everything except where it says true peak. That true peak should never, ever go over 0. No matter what you do not let that go over 0, because Spotify will ding you hard. It does a couple of different things. Like I've seen it. I've actually have tracked where I didn't catch it right. And it actually compressed it. Like it basically recompressed it, and it just sounded like garbage. I had to take it off, fix that, and re-upload it. And SoundCloud will basically, if you have a high frequency information like cymbals and stuff, it nukes you hard, and it'll clip it off. So which is not what you want. It's very unpleasant, unmusical compression. So whatever you do, run through the entire song, and as you're rendering it, I like to stick it last in the chain and hit render. And so then basically it runs through the entire song, and it'll show you what your true peak is. Now, inside Ozone, there is actually a checkbox. It doesn't really have a whole lot of options on it, but it says like basically it's on the master and limited section. It says prevent intersample peaks. What that does is adds like another layer of compression on top of it. So basically, if I was to do the simplest master ever, I would load up some Ozone preset. I don't steal Ozone, but it's not cheap. Get Ozone somehow, and then
there are a lot of creative ways to get it.
I bought it.
You should buy it.
Yes. Oh, those guys are great. Isotope guys are great. Yeah, they're super good. But so load up an Ozone preset, get it to where it's not crushing it horribly near compared with comparative volume, and make sure that intersample peaks is checked, and then render it, and then check it in that Ulean Loudness Meter. And as long as it's at 0 or less, obviously it'd be a little bit better if you're like negative 0.1. That would be my first master.
And then so that kind of gives you like a general ballpark of like very general mastering that is kind of applicable to every track. The problem is mastering is a really individual process depending on what kind of track you're trying to master, which, you know, I think that one thing that we should probably talk about is a lot of the tutorials for mastering that you'll find online are geared towards sort of almost like introducing the concept of mastering. Like, what is it that you're aiming to do? Maybe it's eliminating peaks. Maybe it's confining it to a very specific level. And when you get into more detailed masters of more detailed tracks, there are, of course, a completely different set of requirements that you, the masterer or mastering engineer, is going to try to fulfill. And I'm sure that's something that you now have gotten much deeper into, having done a fair amount of work mastering your own work.
You mean messing it up a bunch of time?
Well,
well, I'd say the next. What are the next steps after the quick start guide? And that, like I said, there's not a whole lot of good content on that. There's a lot of people talking, but I'm like, if you don't start with intersample peaks, I'm like, dude, get out of here. That's really important. And I'd say that, and I said right after the quick start guide, you're going to want to dig into something called LUFS, which is a unit of measure, LUFs. And that same Ulean Loudness Meter actually will tell you this. It's going to give you a couple of different LUFS measures, but you want the overall LUFS. So you let that basically let that run over your entire track, and it will tell you effectively how dynamic your music feels to the human ear. Roughly, LUFS is one of the best standardized algorithms on perceived loudness. And there's some standardization on that. And by standardization, I mean that Spotify, if you exceed a certain level of LUFS, theirs is a little more complicated, but it's basically LUFS. They will start penalizing you. So for every LUFS level that you're past this certain threshold, which theirs is 12, I think. Let me find that.
12. That's still pretty high.
For you, I looked at your masters. So I should have brought this up. It's negative 14. So it's 14 lefts. Negative 14 lefts. Which means that on
We'll
your
just wait for the police car to go by.
Okay.
I can still hear it.
Here, the mastering police.
It's Spotify. They're after you for outing their secret.
Okay, here we go. So
Okay.
YouTube is to negative 13 lefts. Spotify is negative 14. Apple Music is negative 16, and Tidal, which is negative 14. So let me explain what that means real quick. So when the less dynamic your music is, the closer to 0 lefts your mix is going to be. So the more and more you crush it, and the more you compress it, the closer it gets to 0 lefts. And so like negative 4 lefts is just like it's a brick basically. And so, for instance, on Spotify, as every left that you get past negative 14, again, it's a little bit more complicated, but the basic general rule is every left that you get past negative 14. So if you had negative 12 lefts as on your master, it'll actually dock your song down 2 decibels. 2 decibels. Which, is that a problem? No, that is not a problem. Is Drake getting docked down? He's getting docked down like 6. It's okay to go past this. If the music requires it, it is totally fine. Like I said, so there's a lot of music that's just not very dynamic by the way it's written. Like a dubstep song is by its genre nature not supposed to be very dynamic, and that's fine. And so they're going to be riding the negative 8, sometimes negative 6 lufs, and it's going to get pinged, and the whole thing's going to be lower down. But that's okay. That's totally okay. But the thing is, just cranking it and compressing it more and more because it sounds louder doesn't actually make it louder on Spotify. And if you have music that's meant to be a little bit more dynamic, or has like some serious drops and quieter parts, and just needs a lot more expression in its dynamics, you don't want to exceed but so much. There's actually a website that you can Google. Just say like Google something like how much will Spotify turn down my track. And somebody wrote like it's not exactly Spotify's algorithm, but it's pretty close. And that's a good general idea. Like
really good website. Yeah.
Yeah. This you'll get turned down 6 dB, which is okay. That's totally fine.
It's essentially, it's like, yeah, people think like, I mean, of course we want to try to avoid like automated modification of our music as much as possible. That's why when you upload to Spotify or when you upload to SoundCloud, it's like, always send it a lossless format, because it's going to compress it to whatever they're streaming by, and you don't want to compress it first and then have them compress the compressed format. We're talking about file compression here, not audio compression. Similar principle for loudness in your music, but it is just really, it exists to standardize the volume of music on these media. Yeah,
and Spotify doesn't change bits of the track unless you exceed the true sounds, the true peak. Then it will change it. But as long as you don't do that, it moves the entire track down or up. It doesn't just compress the high parts, which is good, which is really good, because that obviously changed the sound, the flavor in music. And I said the same thing with YouTube. They all have their limits. SoundCloud's not quite as modern on it, so you can actually crank your master pretty hard in the SoundCloud as long as you don't exceed the true peak. They don't really care, so crank it away, crush it.
Yeah, well, there's a ton of like house tracks on SoundCloud which are just like banging.
Oh God.
And like, the whole waveform, and so SoundCloud's big claim to fame was like, it was the waveform, sort of tracker as you go along through the song. And it was really cool to see like, the sort of dips and peaks.
You're like, oh, it's coming. And you're like, well,
but now I see all these tracks that are just like this. Some of them are mine. And, but yeah, it's actually kind of an interesting thing. I don't know quite how accurate it is, but it's an interesting kind of study to just look at your favorite tracks on SoundCloud and just what do they look like,
Yeah, and so actually this is part of mastering that I should have brought up before. This is a really important part of mastering. As one of your jobs as a mastering engineer is to make every track in an album sound like it's supposed to be there. And part of that's going to be color. If they just make tracks that are mixed just way different, like you're not really, I wouldn't touch that a whole lot. But you can make them all kind of sound similar volumes. And so one of the measures that you can do this is definitely your ear. Everyone's like, don't mix with your eyes, mix with your ears. I'm like, okay, I'm a big fan of mixing with your eyes and then hearing what it sounds like. And then you're far more artsy in this. I'm a little more scientific on this. So the first thing I do when I master all these things, I try to get them about the same lufs. So, and I find that if you do that, they all sound pretty damn close. Like it would really surprise me. Granted, probably that's because I mixed it all and I just probably have similar taste in that stuff. But so let's say you apply your mastering chain. We'll just stick with ozone for now. and you deal with your intersample peaks, and so it doesn't exceed this. And every track you adjust the limiter to get the exact same LUFS on, or pretty damn close, within point 0.1 or 0.2 on every song, because that's going to give you the dynamic level of your track, the perceived dynamic level of your track. And let's say you did it all to 10, which is still, honestly, is still fairly dynamic by modern standards. Mm-hmm. I know you're going to cringe inside, but like, so that. But
it is. I mean, if you listen to like the songs that are on the radio and you listen to the songs that are really popular, the way music is recorded just doesn't. That much dynamic range is not as baked in as it once might have been with more traditionally recorded songs.
And yeah, so that'd be my step. It's like intermediate step of mastering your stuff is focusing on the numbers and like getting them. Okay, how does this all sound with them all the same level? Is it still not dynamic enough? Like, again, that's with assuming you're doing an album, but like making sure they all have a pretty similar LUFS.
I think that's a really good point, actually, because mastering and getting something ready for a very specific medium, that is where there are some specific numbers that really, really start to matter.
Yeah. And like those LUFS, like just knowing, to me, even if you're going to like focus on your ears, at least know how much Spotify is going to turn down your stuff or how it's going to affect is really important, because you're going to have to live with that either way.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be step two mastering. If I was to go step 3, here's what I would do. I would first, and assume this is all your own stuff, first thing I would do, I would, if at all possible, not mix in your own house. Go to Matthew's house or something. And focus on finding frequencies that stand out, like things that in that room you're like, oh, this is kind of harsh and aggressive now.
Mm-hmm. And this is one thing that a lot of people don't take into consideration. Even people who have very nice home studios with very nice equipment. Actually, where your speakers are positioned in your room, whether or not you have bass traps installed, whether or not you're thinking about where your early reflections are going to be, will really, really drastically change the way that your track sounds in a particular room. And, you might even find yourself in a situation where, I remember in my apartment, that was a very boomy room. I had no treatment in there. So I would play a track and it sounded awesome. Like, I was like, oh man, there's like all this bass. And then I'd listen to it on a proper pair of speakers, and it's like, oh geez, like
an Atari.
That doesn't sound as good, does it? And
and I would say part of the way you can, it's imperative to listen to your stuff on as many systems as you can. And headphones count. Headphones are really important. Like
Apple AirPods are really important, because just think about the way the majority of the people who listen to your music are going to be hearing it. And I mean, I'm a proponent of the idea that if it sounds good on the best speakers in the world, it should sound pretty good on any other set of speakers. I have found pretty consistently mixed results with that theory.
I would focus on, to me, my personal monitoring system has a world of like beautiful, huge, like, I'm like, my system hits 40 hertz, like no problem. Sounds great. Like everything sounds good with that much low end. Master with minimal low end as much as you can. Check with it on, kind of like switch it on a bit. Like if you need to, like I often run a rack EQ that actually just kills the low end, like on like this, especially sub lows. So I can focus on like things, because that low end often makes music sound way better than it should to me.
That's interesting.
Because it allows you to kind of focus on.
At least for me, like I really like. I don't want to be lied to about the low end, obviously. But the way that kind of fits into the track generally influences the way that I master as well.
Yeah, and when I say EQ, I mean like shelves, because shelves are kind of like are basically these like big broad strokes. So they
essentially just like cross over the lower frequencies.
Yes, and so that allows, it doesn't color the sound quite as much. Or if it does, it does it in a very balanced and natural way. But it allows you to really focus in to compare like certain frequencies. So that's and there's surgical EQ. If there's like a resonant peak, you can cut that out or something. But like for the most part, I do very broad, like gentle strokes with the equalization on that stuff.
That's interesting.
And I'd say low end is the hardest part of mastering, because it's the hardest part of mixing.
Well, I mean, on that point, who was the band that you were? Was it Nine Inch Nails who put out an album, and there was like a director's cut of the album just because the low end was so detailed and the mixing on it was so detailed that
it was a bit of a gimmick, because neither of them were very dynamic, but I liked the idea.
Was that Metallica or was it Nine Inch
That was
Nails?
nice. Hesitation Marks.
Mm.
It was like I don't know, the mastering engineer. Again, it went from like 8 LUFs to 10 LUFs or something. It was like, it really wasn't having a difference. But again, I appreciated the idea. And so, okay, back to, I'd say the level 3 is do some surgical EQ, meaning try to find any peaks. There might not be any. If you did a good job mixing, right on. But like try to find anything that's resonant and do super, 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 super tiny surgical cuts. Again, because you're fixed playing this whole thing, but they're just the benching of frequencies of instruments together. If you don't, it just happens. And so if you can prevent those like resonant peaks, that's the first thing you should do. And then what I do is I apply a linear phase EQ, which, long story short, they use a whole lot of CPU and they have fewer artifacts on your on your mix. And so what I do is I would say sub 30. I start doing a pretty intense high pass filter because again, that you can lose a lot of information. A lot of stuff can hide in there that can suck a whole lot of headroom that doesn't really sound much at all. And then I do
in the grand scheme of the mix, probably not terribly important information.
Yeah, exactly. It's worth the sacrifice. Again, this is for general, remotely pop, rock, metal, general electronic mastering. And then I would do a very, very steep low pass at 20K. I often will stack like 3 L filters right there because like if you look at the master, like that information is not necessary and most people can't really hear it and it doesn't necessarily sound pleasant. And so anywhere like I get rid of that. And I have like a gentle like low pass on the high pass on the low frequencies, but like that low pass up there, I'm like, boom, it's like an L, just not like about almost as close to an L as I can get. And so that gets rid of useless or not needed frequencies on top, which if you didn't know what you're doing, you can often save like a dB, up to a dB of information there. And then after that, I would go into multi-band compression, and with main focus being on the low end. So I would want, so the kick would activate it. And so I let the transient of the kick through and then I squish it. So basically setting that multi-band compression that focuses mainly on the low end to focus on letting the kick's transient through, but squishing the tail and the bass of the kick after that.
And for those of you who might not be as familiar with it, multi-band compression is essentially 3 or 4 compressors all stacked together, and you can tell each individual one what range of frequencies you want it to compress. And you can get much more detailed compression styles and techniques with that because you're essentially saying, okay, well, maybe I don't want any of the frequencies from 200 to 2000 hertz compressed, but maybe I want quite a lot of compression on this lower end because it's too much, or the effect of the track is going to work better if I do it like that.
Yeah, exactly. And then I would run, and once I kind of got some like surgical and got the low end, so it punches and it kind of squishes the way I want it to, because that's what modern music does. I would then activate the other bands of the multi-band compression, and again focus on the highs this time to make sure that, like, again, this is super genre dependent. Like trap, the way their percussion's super bright, but the mixes are otherwise the elements are typically very dark, as opposed into metal. Like there's a lot of cymbal work that's just very noisy, so that it's less transient on that. So it's a different approach on things. But if basically that I have some like gentle compression over a lot of different bands, and then I run another multi-band compression that runs a different set of bands, kind of in between each of them.
Oh, really?
That kind of glues it all together.
Interesting. So and really, multi-band compression for me is one of the most important steps because that really kind of makes or breaks how it sounds once you put your final limiter on.
Yeah. And then after that, I would go into a gentle, but like there's basically any decent compressor. I would recommend the TDR, which is Tokyo Dawn Records, I think. TDR Kolesnikov. It's like this Russian sounding name. Fantastic mastering compression compressor. It's free VST. Get that. It's super CPU heavy for a single compressor, but it's great. And I would let like maybe like a ratio of like 2-ish. Because you just want to like have the entire mix bounce, squish a little bit. So this makes the limiter's job easier.
The proverbial glue compressor.
Yeah, and honestly, most every decent compressor that I've used that's kind of tailored toward mastering, the mastering presets like work pretty well. You just need to adjust the threshold, so there's like a little bit of reduction, but like they're pretty close. So that one's actually not very hard to do. if you've gotten this far, it's not very hard after this. And then I would stick a limiter. I mean, like, it's a little bit depends on there's not a huge amount of color difference between these at this point. They're not. And I like the way,
as long as it's a true peak limiter.
Well, we're getting there. I like the Waves L2, just kind of like the crunchy sound of it.
Oh, classic, yeah.
The ozone limiter is fine. There's a lot of mastering limiters. Fab filter's got a great one.
I love the fab filter myself.
So what I would do here is I'd adjust that, and that threshold. There are not very many knobs, and adjust that threshold so it pumps a little bit. But the thing is, we don't really know how much we want at this point. And then after that, you either use, if you're using ozone, again, have that true peak limiter. I actually use a separate true peak limiter after that because I'm anal. What I've been vibing on lately is another free plugin called Limiter Number 6. So I think it's just Limit NO6. And it's got a whole mastering suite in it, but all I do is just use the ISP or intersample peak limiter on that. Okay, and then after that, I run two more plugins, and I run the Julian loudness meter, which I was talking about before, which gives me all the data I want, and then I run an EQ. But this EQ, I don't do any processing on. I basically just use it so I can view the frequency spectrum. This is just so I can see.
Just like a monitor, essentially.
Yes, but it's for my eyes, not my ears. Because I don't want it to color the sound at all, because we're done at that point. So make sure it's not touching anything. So it is any plugin, EQ, or whatever that allows you to visually see the frequency spectrum. Again, I'm a big fan of mix with your eyes and your ears, not just your ears, because your ears will lie to you. Okay, and so we got our entire chain. This is my go-to chain, basically, from a general master.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say you got the multi-band compression at the point where each band's pumping a little bit, and you hear a little bit of it doesn't affect the sound, but it kind of bounces down, and the compressor's got a little bit of gentle compression. Now we're going to start messing with that limiter. And so what we're going to do is set that limiter to some level, doesn't really matter what it is, and then let the entire song play or render it, or however you want to do it, and then look at the Julian loudness meter, and it'll tell you how dynamic your song is. What's your LUFS rating? Okay, so let's say we'll just pick a number. Let's say we're shooting for a dynamic range of 9 LUFS on this album or this song. Is that what we want? I don't know. We'll start there. That seems like a good starting point.
Good a number as any, really.
Okay, and then you render it, and you're like, how does this sound at 9 LUFS? I mean, it might not sound punchy enough. It might not sound like it might need to be squished a little bit more. And this is where your ears do come in. So you've gotten the science to, like, all right, this is what this level dynamic sounds like. And we're protected. The intersample peaks are good. Like, we're golden. So, like, it's not exceeding that. We're safe. Everything, it's just okay to upload now if we really wanted to. But then at this point, basically all you're going to be doing is tweaking that threshold on that limiter to get it to sound the way that you want. Because you're protected either way, and you know how much you're going to be penalized as far as loudness goes on any of these different platforms.
Interesting. And so would you, in that case, say that the limiting in the final step of your mastering chain is essentially just that to you is kind of the piece where you get to musically decide instead of because you've already kind of dealt with the numbers beforehand. And then that final step of limiting is where you sort of musically decide how you want it to sound. Yeah,
because like I said, electronic music without a crushed limiter, a lot of it doesn't sound good. Like a lot of metal, like it needs the crushed limiter. That's the genre, like djent. A lot of djent is like it's a brick, and it doesn't sound the same. It doesn't sound like the intended sound without a bit of a crushed limiter on it. And when I say and I might tweak the threshold on the compressor too, but basically just those two knobs and these two plugins are mainly the limiter is where I focus.
Mm-hmm. All right. So that's a great rundown of sort of like your generic mastering chain that you would put on. You would probably start with a similar process with any song you decide to approach a master with. What about any kind
modern,
of sound? What about any kind of really specific things that you've run into that had to kind of modify a piece of that essential chain to deal with? Have you ever come across something like that?
I mean, I've done some experimental stuff. Technically, again, this is for modern aggressive pop rock.
Mm-hmm.
You start getting into folk or some weird or noisy stuff. All bets are off for the most part. Mastering technically is part of reverb is technically a aspect of the mastering chain. applying reverb to the entire mix. Like, should you? It's not bad, but to me that starts getting into mixing territory to me.
Well, to me that just gets into things that I don't know how to make sound good. So
I will say I've done this before, and this is not uncommon. Is to use, this is actually very common, is to use saturators, like distortion on the mastering bus. That's super common. It's usually pretty transparent, but it can allow. I do a lot of saturation, like subtle saturation in my mixes, so I don't have space for it on the master very much. But sometimes I'll throw like a decapitator on the mastering bus. But again, to me, that's when those roles start changing. So as long as you're okay to like sacrifice your integrity on that, or if you're giving your master engineer and or yourself a lot of signature, like I wouldn't do it. Like so, but I said like I like slap a decapitator, like Soundtoys decapitator on that, and go ham on it with like a 50% mix. It sounds cool. Like it can give them like a nice crunchy like sound that is but it's very colored. I mean, and to me, it's more of like it's the difference between working with individual tracks and a bus, because you're forced to have both of these things are saturating this together. So it doesn't compress the kick; it compresses everything with the kick when you run it through that, which is cool. It can be very cool, and it has a very natural, far more natural, I'd say, subtle or sound because everybody's talking to each other. But again, I try to avoid doing that, because if I'm going to do that color, I'll probably just put it on the 2 bus. Oh, that's the thing. So if you read a bunch of tutorials online, they basically say when you render down your wave for mastering, either for yourself or for someone else, like don't really put anything on the final bus. And I don't always agree with that. So in this case, I would say like, again, try to make those 2 different jobs different. To make those different jobs.
And the way I've kind of always interpreted that is like, yeah, if you have some really characteristic gear or like effects on your tracks that are essentially part of the mix, those obviously have to stay. When I send a track, or when I'm setting up a track for me to master it myself, or if I were to send it out for somebody else to master it, it's like I won't limit it. I won't put any of that kind of multi-band compression on it that kind of gets it closer to where you probably need it to be, just to be acceptable for any of these platforms or to go into a CD. And the way I've always interpreted that is like, don't. Okay, so here's a great story. I've got a great amp. I personally employ him. I don't. There's a great amp repairman in around where I live, and in his shop he's got this sign that says, it's X amount of money for a repair. It's X amount of money plus $20 if you wait while I repair it. It's X amount of money plus $50 if you tried to fix it before you got here. And and that's how I've always thought about like kind of getting music ready for mastering. Like, don't try to fix it. Like, don't try to self-medicate before you go to the doctor, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great. So like again, I try to like separate these two. Like I know it's the same, even though I'm the same person. Like, are you a mastering engineer today? Or are you a mix engineer today? You need to pick one.
Yeah, because it forces you to think like, am I doing my job to get this mix as good as it can possibly be? And the answer should be yes, if you really want to really flesh out something to where it's in a position to be mastered. The role of the mastering engineer is not to correct a bad mix; it's to make a great mix perfect.
Now, on that note, from a mix engineer point of view, I do this, and if you look online, this is I'd say 50-50. When you're mixing, should you have a mastering chain on your bus? I say my music is I try to get very modern and have a pop sheen, I guess, or at least a wall of sound vibe to it, which requires it's got a punch during the mastering. And to me, there's no way I can write the music and sound design it without already having some level of mastering chain on there. So what I'll do is I'll throw a preset, and again, I'll just kind of get it close enough. It's not medicated. I don't care hugely about the LUFS. I'm not doing any surgical stuff, but I am running a limiter, and
it kind of gives you an idea of what it will ultimately sound like.
Yeah. And there's been times where like I've mixed even with that on there, and then I got a master and was like, wow, this is not right. Like it's
been there, done
like
that,
the way I mixed it. It was either too punchy already, too much compression, like on the individual instrument level, or not enough. So I think a big question is like, all right, what do I change the knobs to? And you're like, there's not a preset for me compared to you, for instance. I do a lot more bus compression than you do, like a lot more as far as I can tell. So like my drums, like especially if I'm gonna do metal drums, like I kind of often like the sound of like when you hit that kick, the cymbals are like like just from a stylistic perspective. Like
your drum levels are extremely consistent from cover to cover on each track.
I limit them. Like I'll run a mastering limiter on the bus sometimes, and just for the color of that. And so once all that mix gets to my mastering stage, it doesn't have a huge amount of dynamic range already. So I don't really need to crush it at that point because I've already done a lot of work before then.
Well, that sort of consistency of level is almost like baked into the mix.
Yeah, and that works in the music I make, and that's just an anal part of me because I like to do I like to build those relationships and on a specific level, and then deal with like once they're kissing, then I'll squish them together, you know.
Yeah, if ever any of you have a chance to see one of Cam's mixes, I think you'll understand that comment a lot better. You should just post a picture of one of your rewired mixes on the podcast at some point.
How many tracks do you have? We're like, well, how high can you count? Yeah, I mean, and I would say always like. You can experiment in the stuff, and the biggest thing is if you have those two plugins at the end, the some sort of loudness meter that will tell you the true peaks and stuff, and an ISP, dude, go ham. Like if you have those two things, you can put it on basically any platform. If you follow those set of rules, like you're gonna know what those platforms are gonna do to your music, and that is after that, like you don't have to question anymore, and that makes mastering a lot to me a lot more fun because then you can actually play with it a little bit.
Well, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the idea of mixing or mastering is not to be the best at following a specific set of rules, really. It's to make this track sound really amazing. And it's something you made, and it's something that you get to master it if you kind of dive into a few of these more complicated and more detailed processes. You don't have to master it. And if you get to the point where you find that, this is really something that, like, musically, I can't really integrate with my workflow. Well, thankfully for you, there are people who do this as a full-time job in very expensive studios and will do a really, really good job if you send them the right mix. And that's kind of just with being aware of what goes into a master and the sort of processes that will take place and what different platforms are expecting from different genres of music. That all informs the way you'll mix, and whether you master it or whether you send it off for mastering, that can only be helpful, I think.
Mm-hmm. I would say this is super common information, but I think it's important either way. So there are a couple of things. If you're going to send it off to mastering, or then if you send it to yourself, here's what you need to do beforehand. And I think these are just good general ideas. When you write a song, don't start it at beat 1. Don't even start it at beat 4, but start it at beat like 20. So just leave yourself some space at the beginning of the project. The reason is like a lot of if you actually start rendering on beat 1, often they won't play the first beat, and that's problematic because then you'll miss the first beat. And so when you render some stuff before the sound happens, just in case, and then render some sounds not way after, but like a few beats after you think the last reverb trail is there. Give yourself too much information on the beginning and the end. And like I said, make sure everything's off on your mastering bus unless you want it there for color. You do you, but like make sure everything's off your mastering bus as much as possible.
And with in mind that keep in mind, I should say, there is only so much a mastering engineer can do. You as the mixer have control over individual track levels, about how each of those individual tracks sound, about whether 2 of those tracks are going to a single bus, which is then going to a different compressor. You have microscopic control over so many details. And if you hear a problem, better to fix that problem at that stage rather than bouncing it to a waveform that your mastering engineer, be it yourself or somebody else, has absolutely no control over what you already hear to be something that needs fixing. They won't really be able to fix that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and when you render it, I would make sure it's like something lossless, like wave. Like in your render options, make sure. And this is gonna sound weird. Like if you don't know what this is, I'd say start ignoring it. But like 16-bit or any of these sample rates, whatever your project was, whatever the original was, just make sure those are aligned. It doesn't really matter if it's 96 whatever K or whatever, it doesn't matter as long as it's the same. But if when you render it to a different sample rate, it will actually convert and have a lot of artifacts on that if you're not ready to handle that. So don't just make sure whatever it is and it's the sound and the same between the two.
Yeah, and if you do convert sample rates, well, there's a lot of stuff like dithering and how you convert it, and that's kind of a different thing.
That's a different. But
see, I personally am a fan of really high sample rates, but that's another topic.
And I would say this. I heard this is a good analogy. I think it's if you want to stick it in 3 words, like mixing is the bone structure of a face. So you have an attractive person. Like it is the actual structure of the stuff that they're born with. This is what they got. This is the kind of hair they have. This is the whatever. And mastering is the makeup. So it looks like if you look at a really beautiful girl with gorgeous makeup, you're like, and you compare her to without makeup, you're like, I'm like, well, yeah, that like it looks like it makes a big jump between the mixing, the mastering to the no makeup to the makeup, but like to kind of view it as those 2 different roles.
So imagine Cam Gillette on the podcast now versus Cam Gillette on stage with all of his eyeliner on, and you will understand the difference between mixing and mastering.
Yeah, I mean it's like having a high cheekbones versus having fake contour to make you look like you have high cheekbones. Oh
yeah, and I think that's actually a pretty apt comparison.
So yeah, that would be my synopsis tutorial on why you should and shouldn't, and how not to, and how to mix and master your own music.
And really, at the end of the day, the process of recording, especially for those of us who record our own music and who really love the process of getting into the nitty-gritty of constructing our own tracks from the ground up, the main point is you have a sound in your head. And all of these things aren't meant to scare you or aren't meant to hierarchalize the process of making these things come to be. This is all to kind of get you closer to what you originally heard, that you liked so much that you wanted to put it down on tape or on hard drive, as it would be. And for me, that was really helpful because I think it's really so easy to get wrapped up in all kinds of technique and just hours and hours of tutorials and forums, and you try to do it on your own stuff and it doesn't really make sense. Well, of course it doesn't, because they're mixing completely different tracks from you. So at the end of the day, there are a few really important numbers that will have really important implications on the way your content is distributed, but barring those, just mix your track in a way that sounds good to you and sounds good to other people. Play it for your friends. And actually, one thing I found really helpful is put it in a playlist next to some of your favorite tracks. See if it sounds okay, right in between Jay-Z and Kanye. And if it does, chances are you probably have a pretty good mix.
Right on. So yeah, both of us are super active on Instagram. These are our tags. And Disco is actually on Twitch now, so if you want to, he's got a schedule on there, so definitely check him out. He's just at Disco Volante. But now, thanks for everybody for checking us out, and we'll be back hopefully next week. And see you guys later.
Thank you indeed.